Gonna just move the camera back a little bit. That's a little better. A little less cramped. So I'm gonna start this video off. I don't normally do this. This is not a heavily scripted video. I've been writing out my thoughts in my journal. I will probably turn this into a blog post. If you don't know, I have a blog, analogdreams.zip, linked in the description. I write about a lot of my tech philosophy and my musings there. Normally this is the kind of thing I'd write out pretty heavily in advance. I script a lot of these videos, but with this one I keep hitting a wall. I've been planning this video for months. I think I just need to talk about it. Every time I get new energy to rant about it, I'm like, I'm gonna write this scathing piece that's gonna really turn into a great video. I think I need to talk first and then collect my thoughts and write later. So I've got a little bit of notes here, but we're talking about Linux today. I have spent months, arguably years at this point, trying to find the wording for why I think it's important to use Linux on your computer. Just as someone with any remote interest in tech. It's really hard to bridge this conversation for people who just don't have a passing interest in tech at all, because it's just a lot more work and a lot more learning and whatever. But if you go onto like the subreddits or a forum or something and you ask people why you use Linux, I see this a lot in the Linux gaming subs now. There are a lot of people who are like, so why'd you pick it? Blah, blah, blah. Everyone's going to have different answers. Everyone's going to have different motivations, and everyone's going to have different justifications for whatever sacrifice they might have to make along the way. To me, there has never been a single reason that's compelling enough for someone to uproot their entire tech life and switch everything they know to something different. But it's the multitude of reasons that start to compound along with what eventually becomes a breaking point. It's too close. I think I'm overexposed. That's probably fine. Using what you know is comfortable. Using the most common choice is easy. Not thinking too deeply about the tech you use is the path of least friction. It's effortless. Until it isn't. Until that unexpected update restarts your PC when you were waiting for a massive project to render overnight and you have a tight deadline. Until you just truly get burned out on advertising being pushed through push notifications on your own desktop computer. Until you just get fed up at being asked to switch to Microsoft Edge instead of whatever browser you happen to choose, even though Edge is no longer its own distinct browser anymore. Until you get screwed when Microsoft EOLs the operating system that you're using in record time and your computer, which is otherwise perfectly fine, doesn't support some random requirement for the new one. When you hit that breaking point, you're gonna feel inspired. You're gonna feel invigorated, fueled by that righteous rage. You're gonna go download Ubuntu or Linux Mint or Pop! OS. You're gonna get that ISO, you're gonna mount it to a flash drive, you're gonna test it out on your computer, and you're gonna commit to either switching or dual booting. And within a month or two, you'll be back. And you'll be back in the familiar of what you know, or maybe you just stopped switching your dual boot, stopped going through the hassle of it, and you're gonna stick with where you are. You're gonna feel happy and complacent. Because it's the wrong way to go. The thing that I run into every time, whenever these discussions come up, is that, like I said, there is no singular breaking point. What actually ends up needing to happen is a mindset shift about how you view technology in the world and what your relationship with it is. And when, why, and how that happens is going to be different for every individual. I've gone back and forth forever. I've been using Linux since I was like less than 10 years old. I still have fond memories of this computer lab my mom worked at her university that had Red Hat Linux 5. I still have the instruction manual for it somewhere from that same university. Had Red Hat Linux 5 running on their computer labs. And I built some of my first websites there. I've tried pulling them up. I have some of the HTML files for them, but most of them don't work. Like I don't have the source images at this point anymore. But they were hosted on the university server, just goofy things like, hey, I'm Adam, I like Pokemon and whatever. Because, I was like 8, 7 maybe. This was literally still in the 90s itself. And I remember vaguely, obviously I only have vague memories, but like it was a little different, but otherwise it was just, I found the program menu, the start menu equivalent, found the web browser, found the text editor, and went about my business. I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't a core part of my like personality or anything. It's just something I used. And then growing up in schools, we had Windows 95, 98. We had a couple computers that were like iMac G3s or whatever. Then Windows XP was the big thing for the longest time. And then by the time I got to high school, I was probably late middle school and then into high school, I got really into Linux again. Ubuntu was the big thing at the time. I still have some of my original CDs. It was the coolest thing in the world to just get a CD and some stickers shipped free to me for this thing. And I always thought it was cool. I grew up with friends who would installed Gentoo from scratch from floppy disks, and that would be their flex point. These days it's Arch that everyone flexes to be able to install. But, they compile Gentoo or install it from scratch from a floppy, and that was the whole flex, and we'd look for the tiniest distros we could run on any computer. It was a lot of fun. I remember melting my laptop's iGPU by using the comp.is effects and having to get a new laptop, basically. But I never switched. full time. I always used the Linux. I'm always a multi-tool kind of person. Like I play on any game console. I will use any operating system, right tool for the right job. I'm never attached to any one, but it was never my primary platform that I computed on. There were a lot of reasons for this. As a creative professional now, and just creative individual, most of my software didn't run on Linux. I need to do work. I want to do my art. I'm going to do it where I can. I do remember in high school and college, I always had a second desktop or a laptop that was purely running Linux, but it was mostly for fun, because that's all Linux seemed like at the time. Was like, yeah, it's this cool alternate operating system, but if you want to do anything for reals, you need the software that you only have over here. And it was this weird disparity in my brain where, like, I would always keep a computer. Like I said, I often had a spare ancient laptop that I'd revive, or an old desktop that I'd run Linux. I'd feel so compelled to run it there, even though I knew I couldn't game on it at the time, for sure. I couldn't run any of my creative apps, anything like that on there, but I still felt compelled to, and I didn't know why. And so throughout my entire YouTube career, I've covered Linux off and on. Some of my best videos before I really started getting into the whole streaming thing was just like walking through new distros on VMs and how to do specific things in certain distros and whatever. I always felt attracted to it. Part of it was an aesthetic thing. I was huge into the hackers aesthetic. The whole, Justin Long's character in Die Hard 4 was like my dream way to be in terms of the way his computer was set up and having the little cyber deck in his bag and all those things. But some of it was also that sense of control. And I've been really struggling with my relationship with technology over the past couple of years. I have always been a huge tech nerd. I've been into computers. I started PC gaming when I was 9 months old on DOS. I've always been into technology, but more and more I see the negative repercussions it has on the world, on people's lives. And I've been really getting into the whole digital minimalism trend, which is not getting rid of all your technology. Minimalism is often misunderstood. It's not getting rid of all of your things. It's carefully evaluating everything you use and new thing that you adopt, and evaluating whether it will have a positive meaning on your life, positive impact, and whether it's the right tool for the job. And as I've said with that, as I've tried to evaluate this, I've made lots of little changes. I completely abandoned TikTok. I kept thinking, I found easy success on TikTok. Once I joined, I spent forever just being like, this is stupid. I don't understand. Why do people want to just dance on camera? Brain rot. Then I had a phase where I was like, okay, micro-learning. I found so much cool educational content and relatable ADHD content on TikTok, and I was just like, okay, this is a mind-blowing avenue of micro-learning to educate people. And so I started making streaming TikToks, and I got up to like 20K followers on TikTok. It was great, but I kept running into most of the stuff there, even in my niche, wasn't actually educational. It was everyone plagiarizing just basics from other books or YouTube videos and just being like, did you know about the rule of thirds with composition? And everyone's like, mind blown. And I got some weird jadedness with that. And then with streaming stuff, it was all just grifters being like, I got this $20 mic from Amazon and it's better than the SM7B and blah. And then they don't even demo it. And they're just trying to push you to their TikTok shop stuff. I got really disconnected with that. And then I started realizing, going through phases of processing what is being done to our attention spans. And by attention spans, I don't mean, short form content bad because then you don't appreciate long form content and that means you don't pay attention. I mean, we are turning into a society that cannot for a single moment put our phone down long enough to sit in solitude with our own thoughts, with our own ideas, our feelings. We want to escape every moment of silence of being with our feelings and find some new slot machine on our phone that gives us the dopamine. That is so incredibly damaging. And one of the biggest things I was worried about kind of came true. I heard stories from inside of classrooms where teachers were talking to their students about TikTok getting banned, which obviously lasted all of 12 hours. Not the point. There were students who genuinely were like, how am I supposed to discover new music now if I don't have TikTok? And I combine this with the rise in AI, with the rise of everyone passing off their emails and their school papers and whatever to ChatGPT or whatever it is they want to have created, or to pass off their image making instead of just making something with your hands, which I love doing so much. They just want to have an AI generate it. Just like how we lose the ability to communicate or to spend quality time together as much. We are going to lose the ability to read and write and create by ourselves without the assistant. Every time you're like, oh, I don't feel like writing this, I'm going to have this write it. You are weakening that muscle in your body to write things. And I think that was a big awakening for me, and I'm going to talk a whole lot about that over on the art channel in another video kind of like this. But all of these shifts kind of combined, along with everything in the political climate going on right now with big tech making crazy decisions, games getting removed, software as a service problems, all of these things kind of come down to not me just sitting at home being like, the internet was so much better in the 2000s and games were so much better on the PS2 and everything's bad now. New is bad, old is good. To, we have given up agency. We have given up control. We have given up personality, and we have given up humanity on the internet and with our technology. With our technology, it affects us in our day-to-day lives because it controls our relationship with it, with what we can do with it, how we can do with it, and our feeling of agency. And online, the lack of humanity has greatly contributed to all of this around us right now. And I don't think it needs to be doomerism, doom and gloom. I think it's something we can tangibly start to make efforts to fix. That's why I'm making videos about making your own website, even if it's just a goofy little NeoCities page. Putting more humanity into the internet and spending less time under the umbrella of major corporations controlling everything you see and you do, that makes change. It's small change. It's small change that will have to snowball. We can't just do a thing and fix it. I cannot fix the internet. I cannot tell you how to fix the internet, and I have no confidence that I can get us all to rise up and make one big change that's going to fix the internet, because fixing the internet, fixing technology, fixing our relationships with technology is going to require a series of mindset shifts and personal changes that all snowball together. Spending less time refreshing algorithmic feeds and spending more time on independent websites and reading what a real human being wrote and interacting with real human beings in real life, turning off or uninstalling those applications, putting more real humanity and not AI-generated slop and not specifically on billionaire-owned content platforms. That is how we start to make change. Embracing the small web, embracing technology in your life that you can control and have ownership of is how we do that. In some ways, that for like movies or games, that means buying physical media. In other ways, that may mean switching operating systems. It may mean making your own website and funneling people to that instead of posting as much to content platforms. Little things like this add up a lot. Every time someone's like, we used to just browse websites and we can't do that anymore. Everything's on Reddit or Instagram or whatever. You still can. They still exist. A lot of people still make them. We just have to put in the time to do it, to use it. Put in the effort. Download an RSS reader. Look at some blog rings. Something. We need to engage less with the billionaires and more with our fellow person. So to wrap this all back to Linux, I've wanted more control and agency over my technology. I've gotten fed up with the constant Windows update cycle, with things breaking, with feeling like every day I turn on my computer and there is a feature I no longer have or something else I'm not allowed to do with it, that it just stopped feeling good. Now, specifically when it comes to my professional work, I've been notorious in the Linux community for being the bad guy, for saying, hey, Linux is not suitable for my job. It's not suitable for creative work. Stop asking me to switch to it. And in every single one of those videos, I usually came at it. You know, I talked about that self-righteous rage of Windows sucks, I'm going to switch to Linux. I kind of came at it from the alternate angle of that righteous rage of I tried switching again, everything broke, nothing I wanted worked. Why do you keep insisting it's fine? I do truly believe the Linux community needs a lot more self-awareness. I truly believe that in the good-spirited well-meaning sense of evangelism or advocacy, it's super easy to just brush any inconveniences, any problems, any true issues under the rug because it's just better over here and you'll find a way to deal with it. Or you expect to do this, you're using it wrong. For anyone to ever tell someone that they are using Linux wrong when Linux is the platform of user control and user ownership, they themselves do not understand what Linux is about. And I've felt this for a very long time. The whole point of using an operating system like Linux, an open platform, and using open source software and supporting this entire ideal is that I am the one in charge of my own experience. You cannot tell me I am doing it wrong by wanting to do things the way I want to do things. Period. And so I came at those videos with that sense of rage, that frustration with the community, that I've been using Linux my entire life. You don't get to tell me I'm doing it wrong. And I've become notorious for being like, hey, it doesn't work for this. I will say right now, professionally, Linux is still not up to snuff for creative professionals. It's not. There's hardly any real worthwhile creative software on there. There's a lot of great open source video editor projects out there like Kdenlive and Shotcut and whatever. None of them are suited for professional work. A lot of them are barely suitable for goofy little home movies. You got to make a lot of compromises with it. There's a lot of friction. It's great that they're making them from scratch, and I want to support them, but also I'm going to use the tool that lets me do my job, not the one that's, that was a good try, y'all. No, I'm going to use the one that works for me. DaVinci Resolve technically runs on Linux now. You can use DaVinciBox to basically run it on any distribution. It runs a lot better. There are still a ton of issues with anything from getting window controls around your window to codec support, specifically audio codecs. Like everyone talks about the video codecs, your audio codecs will mess things up more. And as a hardcore professional studio user of Resolve, there's just a lot of little stuff with plugins and effects and other things that just, and raw footage that is just not, color management, that is just not a good experience. And probably will never be. But that's okay. Not every task, not every job, not every tool needs to be replaced. And that's kind of the extremism that I was talking about with the community before. Not everything needs to go a certain way. Right tool for the right job. And to make change, you just have to gradually replace bits and pieces. So my work still cannot really live on Linux, period. I can't do any of my visual work on it. I can barely do my audio work on it. It's just not a solution. So for that, in my insistence that I give up Windows, especially because I was encountering all sorts of audio DPC latency on my Windows machines, even if I made them super powerful, I went with a tiny little Mac Studio. Now I know a lot of people, especially in the Linux scene, hate Apple. Apple's big evil corporation or whatever. Compared to Microsoft, they're really not. And as far as the tangible, pragmatic product that I get, it's in a closed box that isn't doing too much telemetry that is being sent outside of Apple. I'm sure they have tons of my data, but they're not doing what Microsoft is doing with it. They're not forcing a ton of changes against my will, and it's just a kind of purpose-built tool for my job. And it's also the best one hardware-wise on the market at this point, especially once you start scaling down in price. And so I went with that. But where Linux could come in is my gaming PC. I've made multiple videos, entire series on the channel over the years of trying to use Linux for gaming. And it's finally at the point where there's virtually no reason to keep Windows for gaming at all. I've been using Bazite. Bazite is kind of like a Steam OS clone, and I know they hate being called that. It's built on Universal Blue, which is it's a Fedora-based distribution that is basically built so that you can't mess up the operating system. Like the core just like on Steam OS, immutable is what it's called. The core operating system itself is kind of locked down a lot and only updated through official updates, and then you can install user-level stuff, software, things like that. Some software you have to jump through hoops compared to normal distros and stuff. And for standard desktop gaming or handheld gaming, it is perfect. It is wonderful. Virtually every game I've ever wanted to play works. I've run into some issues with trying to mod games, and what I will often do is install and mod the game on Windows and then replace my files on Linux with those, and that's worked great so far. With Dragon Age Origins, there have been a couple missing mods whenever I did that, but it was fine. I've played through old games, I've played through new games, I've played through multiplayer games now. Battlefield 2042 still doesn't work, but like Marvel Rivals works. I had a lot of issues getting Minecraft Bedrock running. There is a launcher for it, but you have to already own the game on the Google Play Store for that to even try working. And if you don't have an Android device to buy it on, you can't do that. So I had to go through a lot of hoops and just use an Android emulator to buy Minecraft, to play Minecraft Bedrock Edition on Linux with my kiddo by emulating the Android version, which is whole stupid backwards. I don't know, Microsoft won't support Bedrock on other operating systems, even though they support the Education Edition, which is just Bedrock on those platforms. Again, another reason I don't want to support Microsoft. All that to say, Linux does not replace my work, but it replaced my gaming. And it's been a beautiful experience. For a while, I was running a dual GPU VM so that I could play Minecraft before I got it working, and so I could try to do things like run Photoshop or Resolve, because just running it on Linux was not working. Then I switched to a dual rig configuration where I was using my wife's M1 Air MacBook, or M1 MacBook Air, and running Photoshop and Resolve on there. Wasn't really performant for that. And then I started dual booting for a bit because I really wanted to be able to do Photoshop in the house. And I still do that sometimes, but since all of the games I want to use now run perfectly fine on Linux, I have been Linux full-time on my gaming desktop for 8 months now, 7 or 8 months. And I am in the process of my game streaming rig that I keep here in the studio, has typically been Windows because all the streaming stuff. There's been good enough support on Vazite with the GoXLR. That open source GoXLR utility works perfectly fine with the GoXLR. It's wonderful. There are some apps for Stream Deck. I've not had a whole lot of success with them, but I'm going to start looking into the BitFocus stuff, and I think that will work fine. So I'm going to convert my whole streaming rig over to Linux 2 now. Now, I started with Vazite. It's great if you're looking for a beginner distribution. Typically, I'm always someone who doesn't understand everyone's obsessions with every little new distribution, because most of the distros have so little differences. It's like, oh, it's got a fancier default theme. It comes with these installed programs. And I'm like, how does a standard Linux user watch these videos? It's like, I guess, watching house tours of empty houses, that it's like, oh, this one is the same layout as the last one, but the bathroom is turned 90 degrees this way. I don't know. I never got it. But Vazite is one that's obviously built to kind of replicate that SteamOS experience, even with the SteamOS little overlay launcher, since SteamOS itself hasn't supported other graphics cards or other hardware. And so between that, the way it has Proton easily set up and everything, like, it is the best out-of-box experience for gaming. That being said, I have run into so many issues with it that at this point I can't tell if they're just me or if they're the distro, but I've not encountered them on other distros, that I'm actually giving up on Vazite for 2 reasons. The first one is that I actually have to rebase it because I started with AMD. I discovered through this recent NVIDIA generation launch that the AMD card I'm using just performs horribly compared to all the other high-end NVIDIA cards I have on the market, or I have in my studio specifically. And so I need to rebase it for NVIDIA anyway if I want to switch. So I would need to do a lot of changes anyway. But secondly, I just have so many of these little issues. So examples of these. Network storage on Vazite. Something about it doesn't work right. I have lots of issues with even secondary storage, because originally I set up my rig. It had a 4 terabyte drive, a 2 terabyte drive, and a second 2 terabyte drive. None of those drives were mounted on boot. And every time I went to open them in Dolphin, the file manager, I'd have to put in my password or the keyring password to open them, even though they're not encrypted. The only reason that should happen is if they're encrypted. And so any program that was set to store cache there, or like my downloads, torrents, whatever, to those drives wouldn't work on launch because I'd have to go log in and remount the drives. And then network storage is even worse. Actually navigating and using network storage, the paths get remapped in weird ways that it barely feels functional in the file browser itself. I often can't even open images from folders on my NAS because the picture viewer just like can't access them for some reason. And then trying to save files, like even just a document, like I'm a writer, I do a ton of writing. Typically I write on a laptop or my iPad. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna install OnlyOffice or OpenOffice or LibreOffice or whatever. I tried every single Office suite and it didn't see the folders that I already added to my favorites on my NAS. And anytime I tried to open an SMB or NFS share, it would just say it's not supported or just not show network storage at all and won't let me write to it. So many weird little quirks like that I don't know if it's a universal blue thing. I don't know if it's because of the way the immutable file system is set up. It doesn't want to mount things the same way. I don't have these issues on other distros. And so little things like that have added up. HDR was working great for a while, but then broke. Like I can enable it. My monitor detects it as enabled. But like, say, again, Marvel Rivals, for example. I was playing in HDR fine, and then one day it just is very clearly not HDR anymore. The colors are desaturated. The brightness is not as high as it should be. Like the contrast is not there. I can tell it's in SDR and just not rendering the game in HDR, but I have no control over that. and it's just busted. I may not find better results with that elsewhere. That may be a Wayland bug. I don't know. But it was working, and then it stopped. So many little things like that that are compromises for the type of experience that Bazite is going for, that I'm ready to go on top of just installing traditional apps is a lot of extra work. You have to do the RPM OS tree and like rebase your image every time you want to install a program. It's really frustrating. And so I think I'm ready for Arch at this point. I've been using Linux my entire life, since the 90s. I think I'm ready for Arch. I am not going to do a full bare bones from scratch install of Arch. I understand that that's a flex point for some people. I truly don't care. Like I said, I grew up when installing Gentoo from scratch from floppy disks was the flex. It does not impress me. I'm going to use Endeavor. I just need the thing to work. I don't need to manually pick and choose all these elements and have it break when I don't do it right. I just need it to work. But I think I'm moving to Endeavor this year. I'm switching my game streaming PC over to it, and then I'm probably going to back up my home folder and my 2 terabytes of installed Steam games somehow, and switch my desktop in the house over to Endeavor as well. With NVIDIA, I know that's the big thing, but like, yeah, my AMD card worked fine in Linux, and especially with the new Shadowplay-like program I showed you, like I can record clips with it, whatever. I never had a significantly negative enough experience with AMD or with NVIDIA on Linux to ever, like, everyone's always like, yeah, but the NVIDIA drivers aren't great or whatever. Like, I've never had major issues. You gotta wait on them. Like, currently I am specifically waiting on the new generation NVIDIA drivers to be available for Linux. But other than that, like, I've never had a bad enough experience, and I'm leaving a lot of performance on the table. And I think there are some issues in Resolve on Linux, specifically with AMD, whereas it works fine in NVIDIA. So that may be part of the experience I've had. So I'm switching. I'm moving away from Windows entirely. My work is done on Mac now. I still have Windows for when, like, installed on a dual boot on my stream rig or whatever for when I need to do tutorials, benchmark, that kind of thing. But my day-to-day creative and professional work is done on Mac, either on my M2 Ultra Mac Studio or my wife's now my M1 MacBook Air. And my gaming and my hobby time is going to be spent on Linux. And it's one of those granular steps. I know a lot of people are going to be mad that I'm also supporting Apple, that I'm also using Mac. But again, I think, circling back to my core message here, I think it's about picking and choosing what elements you can take control of. I cannot make my creative work happen on Linux. Not without sacrificing everything I want to do. Just period. It does not work. I can move away from Microsoft, which I consider a net win, and I can move my gaming and hobby time to Linux. That is a wonderful step. I can't completely just overthrow and remove myself from every major mainstream social media platform or content platform. But I can focus on making my own websites and encouraging everyone to make their own websites and spend more time reading people's blogs and things created and written by real human beings and encourage other people to do the same. It's not to open up your phone, uninstall every social media app, and just plan to be bored with your time. It's finding the higher quality things to replace things one at a time. That is how you better your life and better your control, and how we can probably better the internet. If you are struggling with some sort of social media addiction, just throwing out every app and expecting to quit cold turkey will virtually never work. You need to plan ahead of time with higher quality leisure activities. Plan some hikes, plan journaling, get into a new craft, find something that you are going to want to spend time doing for the sake of doing it, and you will find the ability to leave behind that lower quality thing. You will actually find yourself wanting it less. And I think that habit, that's, again, from Digital Minimalism. There's a great book on it by Cal Newport. He wrote Deep Work as well. I'll have linked below, or at least written below. But I think that's how it went with Linux too, and I didn't realize it, because I'm doing this whole thing with Digital Minimalism in general, minimalism. But I think what happened was I switched my gaming PC to Linux just as an experiment again, as I do every couple years with Bazite, fell in love with it, realized every game I wanted to play, I didn't need to switch to Windows for, and just kept gaming. And after a while, whenever I did need to switch to Windows to dual boot for something, I'm like, ugh, I don't really like how it smells around here anymore. Where I was used to it before. But once you get away from it and you see like what there is elsewhere, you don't really want to come back, at least not as often. This has been a very weird video. I've had a lot of thoughts on my mind. I wanted to do a structured, traditional tech video about my experience switching to Linux and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that does it justice. I think we are too beholden to expected formats for tech videos. Why would I make a video that sounds exactly like a Linus Tech Tips video or whatever? Why would I make an angry rant video that sounds like every neck-bearded edgelord who doesn't know how to set up their camera and stuff, so clearly didn't watch my channel properly, that wants to make teardown videos every time I share my experience of Linux? I just want to make what I wanted to say. There's a lot happening with tech, with the world, and I think doing your best to take whatever little control over it, even if it's just in small amounts, and I think it would benefit younger people even more. Like, I think this is unfortunately a mindset that you develop a lot later in life where you start to want your agency and your control back. But I also think about kids in school today and how disadvantaged they are because of the institutional problems. Like, I was reading a thread about how like every K through 12 school is locked in on Chromebooks now, and the schools went with something that was super easy that required zero friction. Having grown up in the age where all computers had friction, you know, we had to deal with the friction as part of learning the computers. I think that's doing the kids a disservice. I think that's a big contributor to tech literacy failing. No one knows what a file is. Everyone just knows what apps are, and we need to change that. We need to teach people better. And I think back to my high school experience. I went to a magnet school that had a tech magnet that I was in. They had two primary tech teachers, and these were like programming classes, but they also did other tech classes. One had a standard brightly lit computer lab, Windows 7 machines, a printer, taught Java. We mostly played Halo as we distributed it through the school's network drives. Worms were easily spread across the computers and the network drives through autoplay on flash drives, as was common during the Windows 7 days. And it was fine, but no one really learned a whole lot. Then we had another one who had this big, massive classroom, desks all around him. He had this raised up little thing in the center, and he ran his computer lab off of a couple big servers he built. And all of the individual student computers were just little headless thin clients that ran off virtual machines from the server. And whenever this classroom got redid, we helped build the desks, we helped assemble and upgrade the computers, and then we were involved in helping to troubleshoot, because sometimes the VMs would freeze, and so we kept like the second hand clock up on our system clock so that we could see if the second stopped counting up, we'd realize the server froze, and we would not keep trying to work and realize nothing's happening. We were involved in that process. And the people who weren't super nerds kind of hated it at first because it was all this new stuff, all this friction, whatever. But virtually everyone who went through that classroom came out with a better appreciation for their understanding of tech, a better understanding of tech, and a lot of troubleshooting skills. And I think between that and how much time I spent troubleshooting Windows 98 and Windows XP and teaching my own tech teachers how to fix these things because it was all new to them by that point, there is a real advantage to being involved in the nitty-gritty with tech that we are removing these days. And I think it's all about trying to give the school more control over their experience, trying to take it away from the kids. We want to monitor every little thing. We want to control everything. We want to know that they didn't take an errant sneeze when they were doing their homework without some sort of consequence. We need to move away from that. Originally, I had built this whole video idea off of this headline that's going around that Facebook now considers Linux to be a cybersecurity threat and is banning links to DistroWatch and whatever. That's not really true. The links were a couple pages on DistroWatch that wound up linking to an archive link that had some malware in it. It was an automated process. Every news site is running wild with this. I think it got ran wild with because it's so believable. Because if enough people don't make noise when things like this happen, smaller groups of people, whether they're marginalized or they're just Linux users, get silenced because of these algorithmic things, because we have no control over our experience online or with our technology. These things can happen and us never know about it if people don't make a big enough noise about it. But it's also believable. The truth is, big tech companies, big tech as a phenomenon, if you want to buy into that, is terrified of you installing Linux instead of Windows, of you uninstalling a social media app and just going and having a freaking conversation with a real human being, of you spending even 1 second less scrolling your Instagram feed. It terrifies them. Their entire business model is predicated on controlling your action and driving your attention, and they will spend millions of dollars to gain 1 more second of your time. They are terrified of you having control over your experience and over your technology. And that is the number one reason we should use it. We should use it because it scares them. If something scares the bigger person in power, that means you're doing the right thing. If you're doing something that scares the people below you, the people who will suffer for it, that's not a good idea. But when big tech or, the big corporations, I hate sounding like that. I'm not this kind of ranty ravey thing, but you get what I'm saying. Like, when it scares them for you to take agency, you're going in the right direction. That is a reason we should use it. And there's no better cause than that if you haven't figured out a reason for yourself yet. I've ranted for way too long. I don't know what my Linux discussions, what form they will take next, because this is not what I planned, but I really wanted to get these thoughts out, because otherwise I'm going to sit on this video for another 6 months. I haven't even made I was going to do a 1 year I switched to Mac video. It's now been like a year and a half. It's almost about to be 2 years. So I haven't made that video. I do have that one scripted though. Remember to be kind, rewind. I got lots of what I'm calling the new netiquette, net, but like small web, indie web, ethical web use videos. I've got a few up on the channel now. I'm doing a lot of that this year. I want to do some real meaningful tech literacy stuff this year. And it starts with just taking agency, one step at a time. No one's expecting you to throw it all out and start over. But just what step can you take this month? Not even today, this month. What step can you take this month to regain some control and agency over your social media presence, your online experience, or your personal tech? Let me know in the comments, and I'm going to hold you to it. Remember to be kind, rewind.